A world away from the headlines and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there is another front in the fight against terrorism, the jungle islands of the southern Philippines. It is here that a Muslim extremist group with links to Al-Qaeda, called Abu Sayyaf, is on the run from the Philippine military. American special forces are here, giving critical support to the Philippine military, but doing it in the background and staying out of the actual fighting. So is this joint effort a model of how to defeat Islamic extremism? Is it a winning formula? I traveled to the southern Philippines to find out. It was the first time the Philippine military brought an American documentary crew into the combat zone for a first-hand look at the mission to see what kind of tactics are working, how much work remains to be done. Just north of the equator, these islands are sprinkled over 8,000 square miles of ocean. It's a water world of seafaring people and natural beauty. But this remote and dazzling tropical domain harbors a volatile mix of crushing poverty and militant Islam. Overall, this country is 90% Christian, but these islands in the south are 90% Muslim. For decades, they have been neglected or outright oppressed by the mostly Christian Philippine government. Muslim anger and frustration has fueled violent rebellion, turning these islands into a battleground and a breeding ground for terrorism. The most extreme group of Muslim militants is Abu Sayyaf. The name Abu Sayyaf means father of the swordsman. In the early 1990s, the group was reportedly funded by millions of dollars from Al-Qaeda and trained by veteran Al-Qaeda operatives like Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Abu Sayyaf has waged a brutal campaign of bombings, kidnappings, and murders, frequently attacking Philippine civilians. The group is notorious for beheadings and for its blatant use of criminal tactics like extortion and ransom, all while calling for global jihad. In 2002, United States Special Forces deployed to the southern islands to help the Philippine military fight a growing terrorist threat and to deny Al-Qaeda a sanctuary in Southeast Asia. The joint American and Philippine operation is focused on the islands of Basilan, Jolo, and distant Tawi-Tawi, where militants are hiding in the lawless jungles. My journey inside the conflict began at Camp Navarro, on the far western tip of the island of Mindanao. The base is the jumping-off point to the rest of the island chain. It's one of the poorest regions of a very poor country. The waters here are home to the Bad Jiao, Muslims commonly referred to as sea gypsies. They are subsistence fishermen who also dive for coins. Their homes are those tin shacks on stilts at the water's edge. On the pier, I notice a very small sign of the U.S. presence, but otherwise you might never know American forces are here at all. Tucked deep inside the base is the U.S. Nerve Center for the southern Philippines. For security reasons, we were asked not to shoot the exterior too closely, a request we would hear many times. Foreign armies are not allowed to build permanent bases here. This site is little more than shipping containers and office trailers. The American military wants to stay under the radar. I asked Colonel David Maxwell, commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force Philippines, about American efforts to keep a low profile.
Well, first of all, there's no secret that we're here. You know, we don't hide the fact that we're here. We don't hide the fact that we are U.S. forces, but we also don't make a big deal about it either. And I think people are used to us. People realize that we are allies, and we are supporting our allied partner in their fight against terrorism.
Before dawn, we're heading into the heart of that fight, on the 5 o'clock ferry to Jolo. There's heavy security. Ferries like these have been bombed, and we've been warned that Abu Sayyaf surely knows that an American television crew is here. One last-minute passenger, and a spectacular tropical sunrise, and we're on our way. After a smooth 4 hours, Holo is coming into view, the central mosque towering over the skyline. The distant mountain jungles are Abu Sayyaf's biggest remaining stronghold. The people of Holo are heavily armed. There are more guns here than anywhere else in the Philippines.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because Abu Sayyaf guerrillas would like nothing better than to kidnap us for ransom, or so we're told by the military, we're going to travel in a heavily armed convoy everywhere we go on Holo. This is the front line. It's a place called Tugas, just a few miles outside the city. We're heading into the jungle where some of the most wanted men in the world are hiding. The canopy overhead is so dense that even at 11 o'clock on a clear morning, it's still dark. This area is still very dangerous. We're traveling with dozens of Philippine Marines and soldiers, the ones you can see with us and many more who form a perimeter deep inside the jungle. Tugas was a well-planned and well-developed Abu Sayyaf camp. It's in an ideal spot with restricted access and very rugged terrain. There are more than a dozen foxholes and fighting positions laid out to create kill zones of overlapping fire. There's also plenty of clean water and a variety of fruit trees. The undergrowth is incredibly dense. Just a few feet in and you disappear.
From 10 feet away, from this position, you wouldn't be able to see him at all.
In the early morning hours of September 4th, 2006, about 24 Marines were scouting Tugas, working off a tip that Abu Sayyaf guerrillas and commanders might be in the area. Colonel Nestor Errico commands the Marines stationed at Tugas now.
How many fighters do you estimate were here at the time?
When they had a encounter, it's almost 150.
A force that size indicated that someone very important was being protected, what the military calls a high-value target, or HVT.
So this was a large encampment.
When there's an HBT, the high-value targets, they have several fighting positions. That's why, if you notice, as we go along, there are a lot of bunker fighting positions as we go towards the main camp. We call it the Berklow. They have different fighting positions where the HBT stays.
So they fan out to protect that central position.
It turns out that the HVT being protected here was Gaddafi John Jelani. He'd been Abu Sayyaf's leader since 1998, when his older brother, the group's founder, was gunned down by Philippine police. During a fierce firefight that lasted more than 3 hours, 6 Marines were killed, and the guerrillas slipped back into the jungle. But in January, a body was discovered in a shallow grave less than a mile from here. DNA samples were sent to FBI forensics experts back in the U.S., who confirmed it was Gaddafi John Jelani. The battle at Tugas had dealt Abu Sayyaf a massive blow, killing its top commander. Colonel Errico said that Abu Sayyaf forces simply melt away after an encounter. In the past, when Philippine forces would return to their own bases, the guerrillas would re-emerge from the jungle and retake lost ground. But now the Philippine military turns camps like Tugas into forward outposts, not only to take away the base, but to try to stabilize the surrounding communities. This shift in tactics is part of the evolution in fighting terrorism here. It's about much more than simply taking out bad guy after bad guy. It's about driving a wedge between the bad guys and everyone else.
Basic counterinsurgency theory, you have to do 4 things. Deny the enemy sanctuary, deny the terrorist mobility, deny their access to resources, and separate the population from the terrorists. Those 4 steps. You've got to do that in any case, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, or the Philippines.
Our convoy is rumbling away from Tugas when we slow down, and a group of soldiers suddenly comes running out of the bush.
Are these the guys who were on patrol while we were out?
This is one of our advanced security teams. They were keeping an eye on the roads for hours before our convoy arrived. It's evidence of just how dangerous this place is, and just how bad it would look for the Philippine military if something were to happen to us. We're out of the deep jungle, a few more miles past several checkpoints, and we arrive at a spot where everything feels pretty relaxed. This is Colonel Errico's battalion headquarters. He and his men like to call it the beach resort, and it's not hard to see why. Looking around, my first reaction is that the colonel might get bought out by a luxury hotel someday, if Jolo can ever shrug off its history of violence. The beach and base facilities are open to local families on weekends, but these boys fish and play here whenever they want. The colonel says welcoming local people to his base is a good way to make friends and possibly gather intelligence. The exact number is classified, but there are less than 1,000 U.S. troops in the southern Philippines. Out in the cove, we spot 3 of them, Special Forces divers. They ask us, politely, to keep our cameras at a distance. It reminds me of something Colonel Maxwell said. His forces don't need to hide the fact that they're here, but they don't need to advertise it either. That's because the presence of American troops on Philippine soil is divisive. While there is widespread support, there is also fevered opposition. Many Filipinos feel the U.S. props up a culture of corruption in the military and government, and many Filipino Muslims or Moros are even more wary of the U.S. On our way back towards the city, I ask if we can stop in some of the villages we're passing along the way to talk to locals. Absolutely not, is the answer. It's not safe, which suggests that the Philippine military and U.S. might have a long way to go toward making friends here. Rush hour, downtown Jolo style.
We're just trying to get down to the mosque, but this is the main drag here. Every pedicab in town is on this.
Since we couldn't stop in any villages, we're headed into the heart of the city, with an armed escort, of course. The military says there's been an increase in urban guerrilla activity lately, so our guards are on high alert. The sparkling new mosque was built with donations from the United Arab Emirates. The military raided it in the past, reportedly searching for Abu Sayyaf fighters. We also hear that wealthy Muslims from the Middle East, some with radical views, have been invited here to preach. Not far from the mosque is the waterfront and 2 big projects paid for by the United States. The new road connects the harbor to Jolo's Central Market. Trying to make friends here costs money. The American Embassy in Manila estimates that the U.S. has spent $20 million in humanitarian aid on Jolo and the nearby islands since 2002. The American forces who have been here since 2002 are barred from direct combat, so they provide training, analysis, and high-tech intelligence, all things the cash-strapped Philippine military simply can't afford. This mix of offensive operations with the so-called soft power of relief and development projects is a 2-pronged strategy, killing terrorists and trying to earn the trust and support of a suspicious and long-suffering population. It's the Philippine version of the classic hearts and minds strategy, a concept I heard about again and again from both the Philippine and American military.
You know, we want to eliminate terrorism, but more importantly, eliminate the conditions that give rise to terrorism. The areas of
This is my wake-up call at Camp Bautista, the Philippine military's headquarters on Jolo. It's the morning aerobics class. Those buildings and vehicles behind the instructor are another American Special Forces camp. It's called Advanced Operating Base 150. We're asked not to take our cameras any closer than this. We do see a few Americans out for their morning run. We convoy to another Philippine base, this one overlooking Jolo, high on the slopes of an active volcano with a commanding view of the coastal plain. It's an ideal spot for big guns. This massive artillery saw a lot of action in the past, but today it's almost never used because the risk of killing civilians is just too high. It's another example of how the Philippine military and the Americans advising them are adapting their tactics to guerrilla warfare. General Hermogenes Esperon is the Philippine military's chief of staff.
The solution to this problem here is winning the hearts and minds of the people, not of the warriors. Therefore, if your operations entail collateral damages against the civilians, this will not only prolong the war, it will also earn you more enemies. So we have to earn the hearts and minds of the local populace.
This base is the home of the Scout Rangers, and living in conditions like this, surviving in the jungle, learning to think like a guerrilla is all part of the training. The Scout Rangers are some of the Philippine Army's most elite fighters. They're trained to be quick, quiet, and lethal. And they're seeing more action as the Philippine military shifts to small strike units, acting on intelligence, aimed directly at terrorist leaders, like what happened at Tugas. Some of the exercises we're filming pass right by another small U.S. Special Forces camp. That's it in the background, behind the fence. Brigadier General Ruperto Pabustan, commander of Special Operations on Jolo, says Philippine forces are keeping the pressure on Abu Sayyaf.
For the past few months, the violent incidents and encounters happen here. So
And concentrated on the western part of the island.
Western portion.
The general says the number of guerrillas has dwindled so far that it's getting harder to find them.
The Abu Sayyaf just move in smaller group and continue to evade the government troops. We seldom encounter now.
You seldom encounter them now.
Now.
General Pabustan tells me about one encounter with Abu Sayyaf that took place not far from this base, right on the slopes of the volcano. It's a perfect example of cooperation between U.S. and Philippine forces. On January 17th, the Philippine military got a tip about the whereabouts of Abu Suleiman, a top commander. U.S. Special Forces helped plan an attack mission. They provided satellite imagery of the terrain, pinpointing Abu Suleiman's location. Within 24 hours, he was dead, hunted down and killed on a rainy night by a Philippine Special Forces team. Colonel Maxwell said the informant was actually a long-standing member of the Abu Sayyaf group, or ASG.
His wife knew about the rewards for key ASG leaders from our Rewards for Justice program, from our military information support team, our advertising campaigns that publicized the rewards. She said, you know, what has the ASG done for us? You know, I can't even put milk on the table for our children, and there's a $5 million reward for Abu Suleiman. And so he was recruited by Philippine military intelligence and became an informant.
The Philippine-U.S. collaboration came full circle when that informant and 3 others were very well compensated, thanks to a lot of cash from the U.S. Rewards for Justice program. In June, U.S. Ambassador Christy Kenny and Chief of Staff Esperon came to Jolo for a highly publicized ceremony where the 4 men were paid a total of $10 million for providing the intelligence that led to the deaths of Abu Suleiman and Gaddafi Janjalani. Nobody would tell me what happened to the informants, but it's hard to imagine how they could have stayed on Jolo and remained anonymous with that kind of money. There are also huge rewards for information leading to the death or capture of 2 men Abu Sayyaf is believed to be sheltering on Jolo, Dolmatin and Umar Patek. They are members of the Indonesian Al-Qaeda affiliate Jemaah Islamiyah, bomb makers suspected in the 2002 Bali nightclub bombing that killed 202 people, Indonesia's worst terrorist attack. They're also suspected in the 2004 bombing of a Philippine ferry that killed 116 people, the deadliest attack in the Philippines. They are 2 of the world's most wanted men, somewhere in the jungles of Jolo. As soon as we are up in the air, the challenge of trying to hunt down anyone hiding here is immediately apparent. The island is rugged and covered in jungle. Every ravine and mountaintop looks like a potential hideout. Major General Ruben Rafael, commanding officer of all Philippine forces on Jolo, points out the site of the Abu Suleiman operation. The general also tells me that one of his top priorities is a new push to disarm civilians. In many households, the most valuable possession is an assault rifle. Marine Sergeant Rocky Smith, an American liaison, says Abu Sayyaf guerrillas use the smaller islands as hideouts, sometimes posing as fishermen.
Drop your gun, all of a sudden you're a civilian.
We're heading to a town where General Rafael says American and Philippine relief projects are building civilian support, and where his forces took out another key rebel camp. We're just outside the town of Panama. That open-air building we're passing on our right is a kind of meeting hall called an Area Coordination Center. It was built with American funds. Philippine Marine base here, I finally meet some American Special Forces soldiers who are willing to talk with me.
Nice to see you.
They're friendly enough, but guarded and secretive. They almost never see an American journalist here. They say they try to keep their sunglasses on at all times to make them more difficult for militants to recognize or identify. And they don't want me to use their names. They've even covered them up with black tape and stripped all their patches off their uniforms. I asked them about working with the Armed Forces of the Philippines, or AFP.
You know, what's a regular day here?
A regular day consists of several meetings with our AFP counterparts and how they want to affect the battle space.
What are some of the projects you're working on right now?
Without giving away things that are happening in the future,
Sure.
Some of the things we've done in the past is we've gone into several villages and set up a tailgate where myself, the corpsman from the AFP, sometimes we get local civilian doctors to come in and provide medical coverage. At the same time, we're also distributing products, you know, supporting the AFP, supporting the government, posters and flyers and whatnot, all in an attempt to put a positive spin on the AFP's presence here.
Right. Right. And your own presence as well?
Like I said earlier, we like to stay in the background. This is an AFP mission. We're just here as advisors.
Being the only American film crew ever to visit here, we're honored with a feast. Despite the Philippine military's chronic budget crunch, they've gone all out for us with a military tradition, the boodle fight.
You'll have to fight it out for your food. Boodle means food.
Oh, boodle fight.
Boodle fight.
Okay.
It's a
So
fight.
every man for himself?
That's right.
Okay.
Are you ready on the right? Yes, ready on the left? Yes, raise your right hand. Boodle fight.
After lunch, we convoy into dusty downtown Panama. The town hall is surrounded by walls and armed guards. It's like a fort. I listen as General Rafael leads a discussion with the mayor and other town officials about how to get local people more invested in development.
When we leave the area, there is a big project there. It is owned by everybody. So when it is broken, they should be the ones to contribute for the repair of that project.
We walk to the school compound. The children are curious about the camera and eager to talk to the soldiers. This classroom is buzzing with activity. It's filled with computers paid for by the United States. The teachers say that they and the students are grateful, but that they could always use more help.
Have to get them repaired?
Yes, sir.
Maybe it's the humidity.
Also, sir, and because of the problem of sometimes of the electricity.
Oh, the power goes on and off, and that's...
Yes.
Right behind the computer classroom, General Rafael shows me a water pump that the U.S. repaired last year. It's a little thing like this that illustrates just how poor these communities really are. They don't even have the resources to repair something as basic and necessary as a water pump.
There we go.
But towns like Panama are not only poor, they're living with terrorism on their front doorstep. This past April 13th, Panama became a battleground as rebel forces sent mortar shells crashing through the roof of a school building, into the mayor's compound, and onto the Marine base where we just had lunch. 2 Marines and a young girl were killed. Thousands of people fled the area, bracing for all-out war. And it came swiftly. The very next day, April 14th, General Rafael ordered his forces to strike back at the rebels. Operation Final Option was underway. A Philippine officer who didn't want us to use his name gave us this combat footage. 5 battalions of Marines and soldiers met mostly light resistance. They walked right into the rebel base. The men spent the rest of the day more or less at ease, inspecting the damage and sorting through what the rebels had left behind. The next morning brought a surprise rebel counterattack. After a 2-hour firefight, Philippine forces held the camp, which they planned to permanently occupy, just like they did with the former Abu Sayyaf camp I saw earlier at Tugas. This camp is just up the road from Panamá. Marine Colonel Cesario Atienza explained that it wasn't Abu Sayyaf who fired the mortars, but another rebel group called the Moro National Liberation Front. Colonel Atienza says the group's commander is suspected of joining forces with Abu Sayyaf. 4 Philippine troops were killed and 11 wounded during Operation Final Option. It's impossible to know exactly how many rebels were killed because they take their dead with them. 5 bodies were recovered, but the commander who decided to shell Panamá had slipped away into the bush. He remains at large with a bounty on his head. Just a few miles from the battle are the bright yellow buildings and curious children of Tayungan Elementary School. The school buildings were all renovated this past spring by U.S. Navy engineers and the Special Forces soldiers who are with us here today. The buildings had been damaged by termites and bad weather. The engineers also built a system to save rainwater. The teachers say they're very happy with their new buildings, but they're not afraid to tell me what else they want.
We need computer.
You need more books?
A generator.
A generator. You need power. No electricity.
No.
Right.
It seems hard to believe that this happy little school is smack in the heart of what one of the American soldiers called serious bad guy territory.
This is such an idyllic little spot.
Now that I've been hanging around a while, the American soldiers seem more relaxed. One of them says that working on the school was something they all really enjoyed.
We did. It was a month-long project. We rotated guys on about a 3 or 4 day cycle, so everyone got the opportunity to come out and assist in the project. So a lot of people got to know some of the kids. Ed's pretty good at Tagalog, so he was able to build pretty good rapport with the students. Now, Special Forces has several roles, and one of them has always been, winning over the hearts and minds of the people. The fact that we can come in and do something for the area itself, something for the community and for the people here, it brings a sense of reality and a sense of humanity to the mission.
We're just enjoying the afternoon when suddenly it's time to leave. Intelligence sources have apparently tipped off the Philippine military about guerrilla activity in the area. We're told to turn off the cameras now and get in the vehicles. I've certainly seen some things that look like small signs of progress today. But our rush to move on is a reminder of just how fragile that progress is. How unstable and dangerous this place remains. After leaving Holo, I'm headed for the birthplace of Abu Sayyaf, the island of Basilan. Brigadier General Juancho Saban has been fighting Abu Sayyaf for years. He commands Philippine Marine Forces here and on Holo. He's a decorated combat veteran and an old hand at what the U.S. military calls the Basilan model, a doctrine focused on defeating terrorists with as little combat as possible by building relationships with local people.
What they always say is only the natives can defeat the natives. So to us, we believe that we support the good natives, of course, against the bad elements.
Basilan is much larger than Holo. It's a sprawling patchwork of coconut groves, rice paddies, coffee and rubber plantations, with dozens of smaller islands scattered just offshore. In 2001, Abu Sayyaf kidnapped American missionaries Martin and Gracia Burnham from a resort hundreds of miles to the north of here. They brought them to Basilan, a no-man's land. The guerrillas led the Burnhams on a terrifying year-long odyssey, hiking from hideout to hideout, before Martin was killed during a rescue attempt by the Philippine Army. General Saban led the operation that killed the leaders of the Burnham kidnapping, but new leaders emerged, and Abu Sayyaf remains a serious threat on Basilan today. The group is accused of beheading 10 Philippine Marines here this past July. More Philippine forces are on their way. Colonel Maxwell says more American forces will also be sent here. We land at Kamal Lake Patrol Base, a forward outpost in dangerous territory. It's on a mountaintop near the island's southeastern corner. The weather is changing quickly. In just a few minutes, heavy fog rolls in. Lieutenant Colonel Elmer Estillas is the base commander. He tells me that his men have fought in 3 separate engagements in the last month alone, and several have been killed.
Against the Abu Sayyaf, a decade ago.
General Saban and the other officers explain that Abu Sayyaf isn't the only problem here. This area is a stronghold of the rebel group we first encountered on Holo, the Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF. There's also a more radical group here called the MILF, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Both groups have collaborated with Abu Sayyaf. On a styrofoam contour map, Colonel Estillas points out how close his base is to several rebel camps. We head outside for a better view of the site of one of those recent clashes. It's right at the base of that next hill. I need the local militias to provide stability, the colonel tells me. He simply doesn't have the manpower to do it himself. This is what General Saban means by working with what he called the good natives.
So you use the militias, once you clear an area, they come in to try and help you secure it.
Yes.
For longer terms.
Yes, because we cannot be here forever.
Right.
In remote, underdeveloped areas like this, the Philippine National Police and legal system wield almost no influence. The militias often serve as judge, jury, and executioner. The military has little choice but to try to work with them. There's simply no other way to try to keep the peace. We're driving into the town of Tumahubong. General Saban says this place has come a very long way, but looking around, I'm wondering what coming a long way means in a place that still looks as poor as this. The residents of Tumahubong apparently begged for a 24-hour security detail in town to keep troublemakers out. So the military stationed 2 men in the marketplace around the clock. What I'm about to learn is that there was once a lot of trouble here. Near the center of town, there's a Catholic elementary school. Catholic missionaries came to Basilan about 350 years ago, but Muslims arrived here about 300 years before that.
Hello!
Today, the students here are both Christian and Muslim, about half and half. In fact, as young boys growing up on Basilan, the 2 John Jelani brothers, who grew up to be the leaders of Abu Sayyaf, went to Catholic schools like this one, which somehow makes it even harder to believe that these are the very people Abu Sayyaf once chose to terrorize. 7 years ago, Gaddafi John Jelani himself led an attack on this school and other schools nearby. His guerrillas kidnapped more than 50 students and teachers, Muslims and Christians alike, and held them captive in the jungle for more than 6 weeks. They demanded a ransom that nobody could pay. 6 hostages, including a Catholic priest, were killed. Ronaldo Rubio was kidnapped. He was the principal here then, and he introduces me to 2 of his students, Raelios and Juliet, who were also kidnapped when they were just 12 and 9.
We call ourselves classmates.
Classmates of the kidnapping. Rubio smiles a lot. He seems like a jovial man, but I get the feeling he's laughing to try to cover up the terror of the memory of being kidnapped. I could see on his face that he was trying very hard not to get too emotional as he told his story.
There was an encounter between the special forces and with the Abu Sayyaf, and we were caught in the middle.
He's clearly having trouble telling me a painful story, that some of the hostages died in the crossfire because they didn't crawl flat on the ground like he did.
But the rest, they didn't survive because they were sitting down and they were hit by a stray bullet.
Rubio said things are much better here now. Life must go on, were his exact words. The military has stabilized the area and the economy is growing. In 2 weeks, the school is having a fundraiser right here on the basketball court. It's a dance night for Muslims and Christians alike. This is a place where people of different faiths seem to be just trying to live their daily lives, while the extremists and the military battle it out. Right next door to the school, the military is helping the townspeople and their imams renovate a mosque, which consists of little more than cinder blocks, 2x4s, and a few prayer mats. The imams take me for an American aid worker.
It's hard to express, but at this moment we are very thankful for your help and assistance you have with us here. Build mosques and any development that we also accept your help here. So.
Regardless of the mistaken identity, the fact that I'm a reporter and not an aid worker, I have to say it felt good to get such a warm welcome. I was glad these imams seemed happy to meet an American who just dropped by to talk, and that they weren't afraid to come right out and ask for help. Throughout the southern Philippines, towns like Tumahubong are facing a very uncertain road to security and prosperity. Analysts say that without a serious and sustained commitment of resources by the Philippine government, Muslim resentment will continue to fester, and that these islands will remain unstable and violent. But this one small place, the town of Tumahubong, where a mosque is being rebuilt next to a Catholic school, where people who were once terrorized are now just getting on with normal life, seems like a microcosm of how things could be, in spite of how far they have left to go. Are you satisfied with the overall pace of change that you've seen here?
Yes and no. Of course, we would like to see things change, and we as Westerners and Americans, we want things to change fast. And it is very heartwarming for us to be able to participate in helping to make people's lives better. And again, all of the indications in Basilan, in Holo, Sulu, how things are changing, how the people are supporting their government, living their lives, the development that's taking place, all of these are combining to change the conditions, and we're seeing progress being made. But we also know from our studies, from our experience, that situations like this take years to really achieve success, and it's difficult to determine success. One counterinsurgency theorist said, you really don't know when you're at the end state. It's more like a river flowing into a swamp, and there's it's not clearly defined. But eventually, we'll know that the conditions are such that terrorism has been sufficiently suppressed, reduced, ideally eliminated, but realistically, and there's always going to be bad people out there. You can't eliminate crime in New York City, crime in Manila is always going to exist. There's always going to be bad people out there.